Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to discuss a roster move that took place here right before the major, and one that basically came out of nowhere. I think DK was even saying on a stream that he heard a tip about it, and before he could even look into it, the deal was already done. It happened really fast after the IM Sydney qualifiers were over. It was essentially 3 of the winning members of the Swole Patrol team, Vanity, Food, and MarkE, which of course Vanity and Food had just joined Swole Patrol after leaving Singularity, win it with Swag and Som as their 4th and 5th, and then they sign for eUnited, the team they had beaten in the finals of the Sydney qualifier, joining alongside Cooper and Moose. And so this is the move that we're left with. And so in this video, I want to talk a little bit about eUnited, a little bit about these players that are joining their team, and about, you know, the future of the team going forward, and even kind of comment a little bit on some of the public reactions I've seen with everything going on. First off, to talk about eUnited, I mean, this team did some okay stuff in early to mid 2018. They caught some attention because they did really well in the regular season of ECS Season 5. They had just missed out on playoffs. They had won Mountain Dew League to make EPL at the beginning of the year, and they had some neat games at DreamHack Austin against Fragsters. They ultimately didn't make it out of the group stage, but at least they played really well against Fragsters and had a close game against Heroic even. And they just looked good from an eye test. I mean, despite the fact that Relics didn't really have much of experience being an IGL, he had the team running pretty disciplined. They had some functioning defaults. They had Moose, who was a really great player in more of a peripheral, more of a passive rifler, more used in mid to late round situations. He was a very steady fragger. And, you know, like I said, Relics was actually running the team pretty smoothly, all things considered. But there definitely were some glaring issues. One, you know, Relics, again, wasn't a tenured IGL, so I always had to wonder how far he could really take the team from that position. And then no one else on this team really performed consistently. I mean, each of them could have good games, like Dazzle could have some good games. Dapper in particular could play pretty well, but it never was anything consistent. Some of the other players struggled individually, particularly Relics having to be an in-game leader at times would take a hit. So you did really wonder about this team if they really did have the ability to climb the totem pole. They seemed like a decent enough middle-of-the-pack team in the North American region, but you had to wonder how much further they could really go. And then the team did really fall off a bit. They had that really rough upset to Furia at the Zotac Americas LAN. They had several events they weren't able to qualify for online. And really, the only high marks they kind of had was, you know, their minor run for the Face It major where they upset Energy in a best of 3. That was pretty cool. But they still ultimately couldn't make the major because they lost to Complexity and Rogue. And they did this really cool moment where they qualified for IM Chicago over the likes of Cloud9 and Swole Patrol. And they were somewhat close at getting a playoff spot in EPL Season 8. But they didn't quite make it there. They narrowly avoided relegation ECS. And when they went to Chicago, despite the fact they got a cool little best-of-1 win over Navi in the opening game, they didn't really do much outside of that. And they went out in groups at DreamHack Atlanta as well. Despite some close best-of-1s, they could have actually 2-0'd through best-of-1s and made it out of groups at Atlanta. They had that really close loss to, I think, Complexity in like double overtime after beating Luminosity in a close game in their opening best-of-1. But ultimately still a group stage exit at DreamHack Atlanta on top of, you know, the really quick exit from IM Chicago. And then obviously just recently they had a really rough go of things at the minor for this IM Katowice major, where they were a team that I felt was kind of a shoe-in to at least make it out of groups to be really competitive to get a slot or at least get to the play-in, but they weren't even close to that. It was a really rough losses for them over at the minor. Now, through the midst of all these results I've talked about, there has been a lot of roster instability lately, and in my opinion, this team got really fucking poorly managed throughout all this. You know, on the surface, I think the additions they made sense. They were conceivably upgrades, but just the way the situation was handled just seemed really sloppy, if I'm 100% honest. Because essentially what happened was the original 5 was something like Relics, Ace, Dapper, Dazzle, and Moose, right? Well, at a certain point, they decided to pick up FNS to be an in-game leader after that whole debacle with Cloud9, where it felt like Cloud9 didn't really give him enough of a chance. He didn't really have enough time with the team. I felt that that situation was really mishandled. And FNS still really had some value as an in-game leader in the NA scene. So I thought recruiting him to this team in place of maybe Relics, just because Relics didn't really have that tenure as an in-game leader. FNS does have that experience, that in theory, that was a pretty good move. But what they did was they originally removed Ace, the Opper, to bring in Finesse. And so this obviously already made you kind of start scratching your head like, okay, well, who's going to pick up the op on the team, right? Now, it wound up actually being Relics to do it on a trial period, because what happened was eUnited signed Cooper, an up-and-coming opper from MDL from Swole Patrol. I'm not going to get in that whole drama about Cooper leaving Swole Patrol to join eUnited and the whole situation with Freakazoid. I think I've already talked about that before, so it really doesn't have a place here. Well, the bottom line is that they had Cooper on standby, ready to go. But instead of immediately implementing him in the roster, which I would have made the most sense, just go ahead and peel the Band-Aid off, make a decision on the roster, have Finesse as your in-game leader, have Cooper as your opper, this young up-and-coming guy, someone who Finesse had claimed he wanted to work with, from what I recall on that Peaker's Advantage podcast. And then you had Moose, a super stable passive rifle. So there's 3 really good building blocks, and then you just kind of figure out 2 other members as you go. You know, keep 2 of the original members, you know, whether you wanted to be Dapper or Dazzle or Relics or whoever you wanted to be, make that decision. But instead what they did was they basically rotated between Relics and Dazzle for a few events. They didn't bring Cooper in until, you know, very much later. And at first, you know, it was looking like he was going to come in for Dazzle, and Relics was still going to get to move to a rifling position after trialing as an opper, but knowing that he was on borrowed time in that role because Cooper was on his way in. But then they decided to remove Relics later on and bring in Dazzle, and it just kind of turned out to be a really big mess in how that whole situation was handled. So it just really irked me the way that all went down. And I mean, publicly, the players at the time in interviews would say things like, oh, the whole idea of it doesn't really bother us too much. It keeps us motivated, you know, it keeps us focused. You know, we know we have to play hard to keep our spot. But then after the fact, when people actually started getting cut permanently, then you start kind of hearing that, oh, the environment was really weird, it was really awkward. And yeah, man, like, it certainly looked awkward from an outside perspective. So I really wish they would have just made a decision to, you know, sign Finesse, sign Cooper, make a decision, and then be done with it, rather than rotating players in and out, because then there's never any stability. Like, what is Finesse supposed to do when he's got a different fifth every tournament he's basically playing in, whether it be online qualifiers or playing at DreamHack Atlanta or playing at IM Chicago? You know, when the roster's not stable, how is he supposed to design a system? How is he supposed to practice properly and actually start implementing things that he wants to do? It just turns the whole thing into a mess. And then not only that, then they had the whole situation with their coach, which I'm not really going to get into that because that's a whole other snafu. But yeah, that certainly happened as well. They no longer had a coach either to help things along, and they never really found a replacement for him. Even to this day, I don't think they have a coach coming in to fill that vacancy. So yeah, that whole situation really messed up. And now what's happened is Finesse departed the team. So that made matters even worse. Like, you weren't able to retain Finesse, a key piece, an in-game leader. Well, you don't really have very many in-game leaders you can go to in the NA scene once he's gone. You know, it seems like just the whole situation was really chaotic. It displeased a lot of people. Didn't seem like people were on the same page. Didn't seem like people meshed together or had the same philosophy on the game. It just so much going on with eUnited. And then this move happens, right? Because Subrosa stood in for the Sydney qualifier. They lose to Swole Patrol in the finals after beating Ghost a couple of times, though Ghost did use, I think, their coach to stand in for essentially a whole map, or at least half of a map. And then they beat Luminosity as well, right? So now we're left with this move with Vanity, Food, and MarkE coming into United. So let's talk a little bit about these players, right? So we'll start with Vanity and Food, because these guys are coming from Singularity, a team that was formerly Gorilla Gang, and they were playing pretty well in like the semi-pro level in NA, and Mountain Dew League had a couple of good seasons of MDL, played some online qualifiers for different events, and at times would knock off some other MDL level teams or something like that, but never really made it to any big LAN events or anything like that. Then they did really well this last season of MDL, and they actually made the LAN playoffs and the Global Challenge. And they just missed out on EPL, you know, losing out to Rogue and Envy in relegation despite beating Rogue in the initial best of 3 they played. So on top of that, they also did win WESA USA over Swole Patrol and Space Station, some fellow MDL teams. But recently, they had just missed out on the minor with losses to Energy and Bravado after having beat Space Soldiers. So this team, guys like Vanity, Food, and some of the other guys in Singularity who were pretty good, because I think that like Hydrex and OC were actually pretty good players on the team as well. They had missed out on their chance to be in the next season of ESL Pro League. You know, they lost out in relegation. And so some of these players were certainly maybe good enough to play at the EPL level and were hungry to have an opportunity to do so, with everything that kind of happened, you know, missing out on the minor and missing out on EPL relegation, right? And so they essentially join up Swole Patrol for this IM Sydney qualifier, and because Swole Patrol does have an EPL slot for the next seasons, and they had lost so many players on the Swole Patrol side of things, between Cooper going to eUnited, you know, Zelsis going over to Cloud9, Freakazoid, making it very clear up front that he was thinking about leaving the team, or was probably going to leave the team, but wanted to help him get the EPL slot first, but that, you know, he just felt weird about the whole situation and wanted to move on, and obviously he's joined Ghost since then. So with all that happening, I mean, Swag and MarkE, who were left, were trying to put a team together to fill this EPL slot. And to talk a little bit about MarkE, since he's the other person involved in this move, I mean, this is a guy who kind of had his chance with Energy way back in the day in like 2017, but it didn't go so well. Kind of spent the rest of the year playing with teams like Miami Flamingos and then into Gale Force. And he played really well individually on these teams, but the teams never really did much overall. I mean, the only thing that I can even think of was that they were at DreamHack Montreal 2017, but then they went out in dead last place. And then he wound up kind of jumping around teams before joining Swole Patrol. And he helped them win the online qualifiers to get to Epicenter. He played really well for them in Mountain Dew League, but he didn't get to play at the MDL LAN due to, I'm pretty sure, a visa issue is what stopped him from being able to go to the Global Challenge and playing in EPL relegation, so they had to use a stand-in for him. And again, he was able to go to Epicenter, though, but the team didn't really perform well there. He didn't perform well individually there. And so he's kind of hard to put your thumb on. But again, he joined up with Vanity and Food, and being already on Swole Patrol with Swag, and Sam comes in and they play this IM Sydney qualifier, and MarkE plays great. Really, everyone plays great, right? And they wind up winning and getting the slot. So now it comes down to the fact that after having gotten the slot for IM Sydney, Vanity and Food and MarkE, who were all Swole Patrol members, have decided to join up with Moose and Cooper to now play for eUnited, and presumably, you know, they will take the IM Sydney qualifier spot that they won from Swole Patrol, since it's 3 players from that roster, and they will obviously already have a slot in EPL because eUnited already has one. They've avoided relegation in both EPL and ECS, so they're going to get to play in both pro leagues, and, you know, playing in whatever qualifiers, be in the running for the next major, yada, yada, yada. And that's basically what is going to happen here. Now, talk about whether or not this move is going to be good for eUnited. I mean, for one, yeah, I guess the only thing you really can do IGL-wise, if you're not going to be able to retain Finesse, and there's really no other pro-level IGLs in the market that are available from the North American region, is probably take a shot on a guy who has been leading teams at the Mountain Dew League level, getting them on the verge of making Pro League. You know, again, he did win that WESG qualifier for the USA side of things. He did help lead a team to just qualify for IM Sydney, and you've gotten the majority of those players on the team alongside him. So I think taking a chance on Vanity is pretty good. I do wonder how good of an IGL he is. I just don't know him enough. I haven't seen his teams play enough. I mean, I did see them play a little bit in MDL last season and watched him lead the WESG USA team that won. And they just played like a really fast, explosive style of CS. You know, it wasn't super crazy methodical. There wasn't anything that knocked your socks tactically. But they had the basics down. They had some good players, and they were effective. So I'll just have to see how he evolves over time as an in-game leader. He also isn't a bad fragger for IGL standards, so that certainly helps as well. And so, yeah, it's one of those things where I don't feel like eUnited really have many other choices in the IGL department other than to give a guy like this a chance. And it's about time, I guess, to some degree, to allow an IGL from a lower league to take a step up, have a shot at a pro league team, and see what he can do, right? Especially with, you know, a guy like Moose, who is a very proven rifler, who is very, very talented, puts up consistent numbers across the board. I'm sitting here thinking to myself the entire time eUnited's going through this chaos that someone just needs to fucking save Moose. But, you know, that's a big piece to have. And then Cooper, you know, still has that potential as maybe an upcoming opera in the NA region. Haven't really seen it yet, but you did see it at least in MDL when he was on Swole Patrol, and at times I've seen it offline. So there's still hope for him yet to be a good player. So giving Vanity those pieces is good. Then let's talk about Food. Food has been playing really well at the level he's been at, playing in MDL, playing in some of these online qualifiers, playing at the Sydney qualifier. All the stuff I've seen from him definitely really screamed that, hey, this guy deserves a shot. Personally, I thought maybe he could have been in consideration for Cloud9 instead of the Infinite guy and then Zelsis, who wound up getting the spot. Like, I think Food was at that level of player, if not a little bit more impressed with the times I watched him play. So I think he's actually a quite good aggressive rifler, definitely can bring value to a team, definitely could be another player to keep an eye on in the NA region coming up. MarkE, I think the jury's still a little bit out for me on him. He certainly has performed well online in MDL with Gale Force and Swole Patrol and certain online qualifiers. Did well at this Sydney qualifier, but nothing really offline from him has super impressed me yet. Then again, people like Vanity and Food haven't really played much offline either in their own right to really tell you much of anything. So I think that there's a lot of question marks over this with how well this team can actually perform in an offline environment if they get to LAN events. I think they could do well enough in EPL and ECS to kind of remain a middle of the pack team, but whether or not they're going to be a playoff contender, really hard to know, you know, because I feel like, you know, there's some really strong teams between Liquid, Energy, Made in Brazil, Cloud9's getting their act together, Ghost is still sitting out there. There's a lot of other teams that are above a team like this in the pecking order, in my opinion. And if Complexity makes the right roster moves, they themselves could still remain quite competitive. So it's going to be hard for them to be a playoff contender in these pro leagues, but they could certainly be middle of the pack and maybe get kind of a last slot. And then we'll just have to see how they do in like different DreamHack Open qualifiers and kind of see if they can work their way into some tier 2 events, see how they do there. And then, you know, we'll just have to keep an eye on it. But I think that at the end of the day, at least maybe this finally stabilizes eUnited. You've picked up a group of players like Vanity and Food have played together for a long time. You've retained some talent in Cooper and Moose. You've brought in MarkE, who at least played with Vanity and Food at this IM Sydney qualifier, and he's somewhat of a known value. So I can understand it from that perspective, and maybe this finally gets them on the right track by at least having a roster that lasts a little while, and you know, you have the right roles filled. No one's on a trial. It's a done deal. Now, let me talk a little bit here at the end about the public reaction to this move. So first off, obviously people were going to be a little bit irked by this just because of how quickly it happened after, you know, Vanity, Food, and MarkE along with Swag and Sam won the IM Sydney qualifier. And people feel that like Sam and Swag kind of get fucked over because they helped win that slot, and now they don't get to play at IM Sydney because the 3 other players left to go join eUnited, who they beat in the finals, and now they get the slot for IM Sydney. Or at least that's probably what's going to happen. Then it also leaves Swag in a really shitty spot where he basically has no players at this point in time to fill the Swole Patrol lineup that he needs to fill to have an EPL slot. And at this point, I don't even know if he'd be able to keep it or not, even if he did find players, because I'm not sure what the roster rules are on, you know, how many games or how many players you have to retain from the previous lineup, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, in that sense, it does suck for someone like Swag and someone like Sam who did perform really well, and now they lose out on their opportunity. I do feel for that. I can understand the sentiment there. But also, let me just address the fact that people are massively over-exaggerating. You know, like everyone keeps saying that like Swag and Sam absolutely carried this team through the qualifier. If it wasn't for them, they would have got the slot anyway. Like, that's definitely not true. Like, it is certainly true in the final best of 5 they played where they had a map advantage coming from the upper bracket. So the 2 maps they played in the end against eUnited, yeah, Sam was indeed the top fragger in both of those games and played really, really well. No doubt about that. Can't argue with that. Swag also played really well in one of those maps in particular, then did pretty decent in the other map as well. But it's not like the other 3 guys just fucking bombed or something like that and didn't play well. They also played quite well. They maybe had a little bit of an off game here and there for a couple of them in those last 2 maps, but in general they played well. Also, if you look at the qualifier in its entirety, when they were playing against INTZ, when they were playing against Envy, when they played against eUnited the first time around, there were times where these other 3 guys, Vanity, Food, and MarkE, were outperforming Swag and Sam. Swag had some off games at times. So it's not as if you can sit here and say Sam and Swag carried the team through the tournament and these other 3 guys are sort of along for the ride and then now they get to keep the slot. No, all 5 of these players performed pretty well overall throughout that tournament. And I don't think it's fair to say that these guys got carried to the finals and to the IM Sydney qualifier spot. At worst, Sam top fragged the final 2 maps of the tournament, and then, yeah, you can make a little bit of an argument there, but it's not like he carried. It's not like he was dropping 30 bombs when the rest of the guys were, you know, single-digit kills or, like, barely getting the 15 frags or barely getting half the amount of kills that he got or something like that. It wasn't anywhere near that level. So I think that that's been massively over-exaggerated. So that's one thing to think of. The second thing to think of is, this has happened before, by the way. Remember when Tort qualified for Belo Horizonte last year, and it was Steel, Kusta, and Pollo, and they were playing at Swag and AZK, and then they left Swag and AZK, and they joined Ghost with Subrosa and Wardell, and they took the spot as Ghost to go to Belo Horizonte. Yeah, that same shit happened to Swag back then. Did anybody sit there and bitch and moan to Steel or Ghost or anything like that after the fact? Maybe it did happen, I'm just not remembering, but it didn't seem like it was to this level of degree, this level of hatred towards the people who now take over the slot or something like that. It stinks, but that's just the way it goes. You keep majority of the roster, you decide to make some changes for the betterment of yourself or what you think's best for your career, and these sorts of things happen where some players unfortunately slip through the cracks. It sucks for Swag. I get it. It sucks for Sam in this case too, when you consider just this event, but you know, it just is what it is. And here's the big thing why. Like, yes, they were going to get an EPL slot either way. Whether Vanity, Food, and MarkE stay with Soul Patrol, whether they go to eUnited, they're going to play in the EPL no matter what, because they're the majority of the lineup and they're going to get to kind of fill that spot. But here's the thing. Soul Patrol were having a hard time finding an organization from what I understand. So when it comes to like financial stability, getting salaries, organizational support, those things are pretty huge if you want to be a professional player. And if they weren't able to find that type of support while on Soul Patrol because of the whole situation with Swag being banned from majors and stuff like that, I can understand the fact that when an organization reaches out to you and gives you that opportunity to have that stability, to have a salary, then obviously you're going to have to consider that. You have to consider what's best for your future, for your career in CSGO. And playing for eUnited, a team that has at times been middle of the pack in the North American region, that's not a bad starting point for guys coming from the MDL level like Vanity and Food in particular, right? So you got to put that one out there first. Second of all, you know, unfortunately, no matter what, people are eventually going to move on playing with Swag because he's banned from majors. That's just the bottom line as well. And you're going to have a hard time finding organizational support for a guy who's banned from playing majors. Yeah, it can happen. Steel's doing it with the Ghost, but it becomes a lot more difficult. And yeah, it sucks. I don't think that Swag should still be banned from majors. I'm not even getting into that discussion. But that's just the reality of the situation. You have to consider that as well. Now, here's the other big thing you have to consider about this whole organizational support thing. MarkE needs a visa. He's from Mexico. If he wants to play in the EPL and play on NA soil and travel to other tournaments, he needs a visa to be able to do that. You know how hard it is for him to get a visa as an esports player, especially when he doesn't have an org backing him? It's probably impossible, to be honest. So that's another big thing you have to think about here, is if Soul Patrol were indeed having a hard time finding an organization, and you wanted MarkE to be one of your players, and you knew that you need to get him a visa to do that, then that obviously is a whole other variable you have to consider when you think about how you decide what to do with your roster and what org to join and all that good stuff, right? So that's just another thing I have to throw in there. So I think a public reaction, while understandable, I get why people feel for Sam and Swag, and I feel for those guys too. I think it's a shitty situation, but in reality, it's a good move for eUnited. They're picking up players who needed an org, who were having trouble finding an org, who weren't contracted to anybody, unless they bought these guys out from Singularity or something like that. That's very possible. But, you know, obviously MarkE, Soul Patrol was not an organization, so that's just kind of a free grab. That's just a smart business decision on one hand, like being able to get players that you think have value for not very, you know, high of a price. And so it makes sense from the EU side. Like, I think EU, while I definitely disagree with how they managed the team a lot of last year, I think this move from their perspective just makes sense. Like, you're offering these people an opportunity, you see the value that they can bring, and you want them to represent your organization. I mean, it's hard for me to be too mad at them for making a signing like that. And then for the players, again, like, they want an EPL slot. They want to play at the professional level. They want salaries. They want financial stability. They want access to a way to get a visa for MarkE so that he can continue to compete with the team. You know, these are all things you really have to consider. And, you know, these players have to think about their personal future. Like, unfortunately, yeah, this might mean that you kind of, you know, take a hit to your friends or something like that. But at the end of the day, you got to look out for number one. If you don't look out for yourself, no one else is going to. And maybe you think of it as being a snake or being selfish, but I think of it about thinking what's best for your future, what's best for your career. And at this moment, if they thought this is the best decision for them and their future as a CSGO competitor, then that's a decision that they have to make, right? Again, I can feel all sides of this argument, but I do think that some people are going a little bit overboard on the hatred towards some of these players for making this decision, the hatred towards eUnited for making the offer. So just kind of want to address that a little bit here. But again, it's going to be a while before we actually get to see this team play and actually draw some real conclusions on how good they might be able to be. Something I'll maybe do some content on in the future after I get to see them play a little bit and kind of get a feel for how they're going to set the team up and what potential they actually are going to have. I just wanted to put this video out there. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe for more. Catch you next time.